back to Closeup, everyone. We continue the debate over the domicile law in New Hampshire. I'm joined by my panel. We're going to go to Grant Bossy first. And in talking about trying to fix this problem, Grant, Gordon suggested last week that perhaps the way to go about doing that is to prosecute a couple of high-profile cases, because even the Secretary of State's office admitted last week as well that this law does have areas for problems for people who might not have the trustworthiness that are required of them to adhere to it.
Yeah, and I think Marty made a good point that there's no inherent problem with the law. Lots of states have laws like this. The problem is our state officials have let it be known very publicly that they will never enforce our laws. And having a law that isn't enforced means we're voting on the honor system. You can show up at the polls, and if you don't have an ID, you can sign an affidavit saying, I am who I say I am. If you don't have an electric bill or a phone bill or a lease agreement, you can sign an affidavit saying, I live where I say I live. And there's no follow-up, there's no enforcement to people that sign these affidavits falsely. And we've got people that stay temporarily and give that as an address. We've got people who wrote down the address of a state senator they were staying with for a couple of weeks and saying, I live there, that's my domicile. We know this isn't true. There's a burden of manifesting intent that's written into the statute, and if the Attorney General would actually prosecute some of these cases of these highly questionable affidavits, then we could actually enforce our laws and people would know that there is a penalty for signing an affidavit that you don't believe.
Vander, you like to respond?
If the Republican Party really wants to go down this path and they feel committed to the position they've taken, great, then let's look at Mitt Romney's campaign manager for the state. Let's look at Kelly Ayotte's campaign manager for the state, both of whom lived here for campaign, registered to vote, voted, and had mailing addresses from their home states and returned to those home states afterwards. I'm sure that the Republican Party in Iowa, where one of those campaign staffers is working on Governor Branson's re-election campaign, would be pleased to know that the New Hampshire GOP chair and her supporters feel that strongly that they'd prosecute their campaign staff.
Right?
Well, I don't work for the state GOP, but if the Attorney General's office said, we have a question about your affidavit, and they said, here's my lease agreement, I lived here for a year and a half, I think that manifests intent, and they're fine. If they didn't, if they have absolutely no evidence, no legal ties to the state of New Hampshire, and they left the state, before Christmas or before Thanksgiving, then I think that's pretty clear that they never had any intention to remain.
So go check it out. Now, there's different degrees, I think you would agree, legally on how you interpret this law, because the examples are going to keep coming out now. People who moved to New Hampshire, worked on campaigns, and then left. How do you go about it legally, if you're a prosecutor, to decide who's really guilty of violating the law and who might be a little bit questionable, Gordon?
Well, I think, you look at the basic, it is a matter of intent, but intent can be established by certain objective things, like, did you register your car here? Did you change your driver's license to here? Do you maintain a lease someplace else? Did you move all your stuff here? I mean, we can go down the list of items, and I think on the face, some of the evidence or some of the cases that you brought out in your reporting this week, Josh, warrant that kind of investigation, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if it's Republican or Democrats. It's an important civil proposition for our state, which is, are we going to enforce the election laws, which are just vital to our democracy?
Right.
I want to say a couple of things. I mean, one of the things that the prosecutors analyze when they look at a set of facts, deciding whether to bring a case, is whether they can win it. And prosecutors looking at this case are going to quickly decide that they can't possibly win. The law is as the law is for a reason, because most of it is constitutionally required. These are losing cases to prosecute.
I want to, before you go any further, repeat something that Gordon said last week, unless you'd like to do it. Basically what he said was, we're not going to enforce the law because it's hard to do?
No, the statute supports what these people are doing. I want to take issue slightly with something Grant said a minute ago. These people have a very significant legal tie to the state of New Hampshire. They're here, and they're living here. And the fact that they are young and have no assets and are living in someone's basement or in someone's attic doesn't make them any less here and doesn't give them any less rights than the people who have assets, who can rent apartments and have cars to register. They have every right to vote here if this is what they intend to do.
Quick rebuttal.
Look, no one is saying they can't vote. If you're coming up here to work on a campaign, just make arrangements to vote absentee in Connecticut. I mean, that's not an issue. On terms of proving criminal intent or intent, our statutes are full of it. That's the stock and trade of prosecutors. They do that, and they assemble evidence. And I think the policy choice here is we let these election laws just not be enforced, and we have what amounts to drive-through voting in our state, and I think that is just not good for our state.
All right, we have about 2 minutes to go, and I want to give everybody a chance. Sandra, go ahead. Take a minute.
I would ask Gordon and Grant, where would these individuals vote then? If you have a young campaign staffer, they haven't lived at home the 4 years they were in college, they don't live at college anymore, and this is their presence, their residence now, where would you have them vote? Would you disenfranchise them from voting? This is where they live, and this is where they should vote.
You should have a domicile, and if it's back at their parents' house because they haven't established a permanent place to live, that'd be fine. But a lot of these people are living somewhere when they get deployed here for a little bit. I've got friends in Massachusetts that would love to be able to vote in a swing state. So they can drive up to my house, they stay in my guest room on Monday night, they hold a sign at the polls, they vote Tuesday, and by Wednesday, what do you know, they changed their mind and they decided to move back to Massachusetts. Under Marty's interpretation of the law...
And they can have a job that they're being paid for in New Hampshire. That's a very different example. What you're painting is a picture of something that you'd like to accuse folks of doing. The reality is these individuals have jobs here, they have places where they're living here, and they have an investment in the community here, and they can vote.
I'm talking about Marty's interpretation of the law that says we can never know what's in somebody's mind. So despite all evidence to the contrary, we can never prosecute somebody for signing a false affidavit of where they are domiciled. They need to, as the law says, manifest intent. There is some burden to show that you are the person who has a right to vote in the district because you live here. And if we're just going to say we vote on the honor system, then what's the point of having election laws? We should just, set up voting booths at the airport and the rest stops.
Well, we'll see where this all goes. We are out of time. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks very much for joining us. Appreciate it. This debate will continue.
Croc TV.